Our definition of prophecy, hi Jay, how are you? Our definition of prophecy is entirely the wrong one. When we think of a prophet, we think of somebody who is foretelling the future, like Nostradamus. Forthtelling, not foretelling. Forthtelling the Word of God. And it is a person who can announce the Christian message with authority. A person who knows what they're talking about. And they...
Was the Trinity before that? Like first, second, and third telling, and then you had fourth telling?
I appreciate you stopping by this morning, but
He got up early.
I was listening.
it is a message that is told with enough authority and that the people that are listening are convinced. You know, it's a powerful, the ability of a person to powerfully tell the good news. And that's what Paul defines as prophecy, and he defines that as the number one, apparently, the number one talent, the number one gift. But this is really interesting. Of all the other gifts that there are, leadership and teaching and so on, the one he names second most important is practical service. And I think that's interesting. This is his second thing, and he says, there is no end to the things that ordinary people can do on an everyday basis to demonstrate the love of Christ through deeds of service. And you know, we have all kinds of people in our church that are involved in all, gosh, dozens and dozens of different kinds of deeds and ministries, demonstrating by the way they talk, demonstrating by their service, what the love of Christ is all about. And Paul says that's a biggie. The third one is teaching. The message not only has to be proclaimed, prophecy, but it also has to be explained and demonstrated. Is that what I'm doing here? Explaining and demonstrating?
Oh, yeah.
Is that
Attempting,
what I
you're
do?
trying to.
Big time.
Oh, well, at least I'm giving it a fair shot. In other
We have
words,
some difficult students.
well, thank you. Without an explanation, without detailed explanation, Paul says that prophecy and even Christian service can become very hollow and without meaning. People not only have to hear the word, they have to really understand. They have to really have an awareness of what it's all about. And then Paul says there is exhortation. Exhortation. I got a better word. Encouragement. Encouragement is a gift. Some people just know how to do that. I don't know where they learned it. They probably didn't learn it. It was just there. They know how to be encouraging to people. And it is an encouragement that is not based on threat or fear. You know, there's a very sad chapter in Christian faith where threat and fear was the big thing. If you don't do this, you're going to go to hell and you're going to burn forever
Well, it
in the
still
fires
goes
of
on,
hell.
though.
And, you know,
That's the problem in Christianity today.
Yeah,
That
I've
is
heard
not
that.
encouragement. That is not encouraging people. That's threatening people.
Scary.
Encouragement has to be based upon joy. Joy in life. If you follow Christ, your life is going to be fulfilling. It's going to be satisfying. It's going to be happy and joyful. You don't do it because, oh my gosh, if I don't do this, I'm going to burn in hell. So exhortation, encouragement was a gift he mentioned.
But you're not always, even if you're a Christian, you have things in your life that don't make you joyful and happy. But it's the encouragement from other people and their concern for you that gets you through it.
You
But,
betcha.
you know, just because you're a Christian, your life isn't a bed of roses by any
Oh
means.
boy,
But
tell me about that.
when you're in real turmoil, it's the people who care about you and encourage you, and I think that must be what that means also, you know.
Fellowship of man.
Yes, yes.
Right.
You don't have to be a Christian to experience fellowship.
That's true. But it takes us back to something we talked about once before, somewhere along the line, the difference between joyful and happy. Happiness is a fleeting thing. As a matter of fact, the word comes from the word happenstance, which is to say, as you go through life, there are certain circumstances, there are certain events, there are certain things that happen along the way that make you happy. But you don't stay happy. Because sooner or later something bad happens or whatever, or you're disappointed or you're discouraged or there's grief or something and you're not happy. But being joyful is something that doesn't stop. Joyfulness is above the level of happy. And you can be joyful even in sadness. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
You know, there's a certain uplifting joyfulness that we have as Christians, or at least we're supposed to have as Christians, that overrules grief and disappointment and sadness and so on. But you can't be happy all the time. So then Paul says there's sharing. And this has to be coupled together with kindness and generosity. It's the kind of sharing that you do just because it makes you feel good to share. You just enjoy doing it. You don't do it for reward, you don't do it for recognition or anything else, but you just do it because it's pleasurable for you to do that. Then Paul says there is leadership, and he says if you are called to provide leadership, you are to do it with zeal. That means with a sense of service and responsibility. You have to be willing to be completely unselfish with your time and your wants, and you have to serve through offering leadership with zeal. And then finally he says there's mercy. Mercy has to be shown with graciousness. Do you agree that it's possible to forgive somebody and at the same time be contemptuous of them?
Yes.
Oh yeah, sure. You can be critical of a person, but say, well, I forgive the stupid jerk. That's not mercy. Real forgiveness has to be formed from and come from love in order for that to be real forgiveness. It's never done from superiority. And the reason that it has to be that way is because each and every one of us are sinners and each and every one of us need forgiveness. So, you know, never forgive with a feeling of superiority.
Wouldn't that be compassion? And compassion brings
Yeah,
forth
I think so.
the understanding of another person, regardless of what they've done to you. But, you know, I mean, you can look around everybody in the room and you say, well, you might not agree, but I understand.
And
We're all
that's a-
different. So
And that's
it's,
a tough.
It is a tough one. That's a.
I think that's a
Tough
very
thing to
tough
do.
thing, to forgive with compassion someone who has
But that's the only way
deeply
you
troubled
can,
you.
right?
Right, you have to do it, but
It
boy,
works
it
for
takes a
Brian,
long
except
time.
in traffic incidents.
Yeah, well,
That's why we don't live in LA.
No, but Brian does, he lives here.
yeah, it's a really tough thing to do, I think, and,
It's very hard.
You gotta think about the Lord's Prayer, I mean, whether we like it or not, it's
Right.
forgive us as we forgive
and,
others.
you know, and I
It's
think
kinda scary
that,
sometimes.
yeah, I know, I think about that too. And, when you're into a position where you need to forgive somebody, I get reminded of Jesus telling his disciples when, who was it, Peter, said to Jesus, yeah, he says, you know, the law says that we're supposed to forgive people 3 times. If they do something, we'll forgive them, we do something, we'll give them a 3rd time, three strikes and you're out, okay? But Peter, he thinks he's really cool.
It's an auto.
And Peter says, well, we should forgive people 7 times. In other words, he doubles the legal amount and adds 1. Thinks that's really great. And Jesus says, 70 times 7, which in Jewish culture is a mathematical number meaning infinity. I can just see Peter going, you know. Yeah, that forgiveness thing is a toughie. It is a real tough one. And back to what we've talked about before too, what is the whole accomplishment of forgiveness?
We have to forgive to be forgiven, that's the,
Well, that's true, but more practically, what is the accomplishment of forgiveness?
even if the person doesn't know, you forgive them, it eases the you know.
That's right.
Yes, forgiveness, true forgiveness is
Yeah.
something that heals us.
Right.
Right.
It may not be accepted to the person you're offering it to. They may not care.
They might not even know.
This is an inward healing process for each of us.
Being angry is like taking the poison and expecting someone else to die.
You got it.
I was
You got
trying to think of that, it's a Chinese proverb, and I couldn't quite get it.
Yeah.
That is absolutely true. And the only way you can purge yourself of anger and hatred and a whole lot of other things is to truly and honestly forgive. And along with that stops eating you inside. And that's why forgiveness is so important for us. The other person may not care one hoot.
Or even know.
Yeah.
Or even know, that's
Or
true.
think they need to be forgiven for
Right,
everything.
that's true too. I remember one incident, I saw an incident on TV. This was some time ago. There was a fellow who had murdered this woman's son in cold blood. I mean, it was absolutely senseless murder. And the court gave the lady, the black lady, a chance to stand up in court and make a statement or say what she wanted to say. And she stood up in court in public and she forgave him. And I was blown away. I was just absolutely blown away by it. And you could have heard a pin drop in that court. And you couldn't tell whether that affected the guy that committed the murder or not. But you knew that this lady was...
There's also the story about the person convicted of murder, killed a woman's son or daughter or somebody, a family member. She went to that prison every day.
Right, Barbara Link did
I
that.
remember
That was and when he came out, she took him in, and that transformed him. That was killing him with
It's-
kindness.
Well, our Barbara
That's
Link,
like, how can-
our Barbara
how can
Link
you
did the
do
same
that,
thing.
you know?
when her son was murdered, she went to prison and
She spoke with others.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, to me, that's pretty amazing.
that, I've always thought that was
The
That's
amazing.
a
Shack,
toughie.
that was
Yeah.
the name of the
The
book,
Sh-
was The
yeah.
Shack.
The Shack, yeah, we read that,
Yeah.
part of a Bible study.
Yeah.
All right, now, we go on into verses 9 through 13 in chapter 12, and we hear a very familiar Paul speaking to us. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Gee, I wish I could do all that. He starts out
You're
by
pretty
saying,
good
"Oh, thank you."
about it.
That's pretty good coming from the wife.
Yeah, it really is, and I have the $200 ready to give her when I
We'll go shopping later.
Paul says love has to be sincere. No kidding. No hypocrisy. No play acting. No ulterior motives. No loving with an expectation of gain coming back. No selfishness involved, just pure, outgoing love for its own reward. And boy, are there a lot of people in our society that need to hear this and understand this. I know from my experience with high school teenagers, there are a lot of kids that have a completely perverted, twisted, sick definition of love. It's a self-centered, arrogant, selfish, possessive love. And you know, even 14, 15, 16-year-old boys have girlfriends that they beat up if she doesn't behave the way they want her. It's a horrible, sick understanding of what love is all about. And more people need to hear what Paul says about love, especially out of 2 Corinthians chapter 10, where Paul defines love.
Well, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, that's what it is.
That's what I'm thinking of,
Yeah.
1 Corinthians
Yeah.
chapter 13.
Right.
Love is kind, love
Love
is
is
patient,
right.
love, yeah, okay. Paul says, hate evil, hold tight to the good. And he says we've got to be passionate in this regard. I mean, you've got to hate evil, you've got to love good, there's no in-between, there's no gray area in this. You can't kind of like some evil things, and I mean, there's just no in between. You don't hate evil because of the possible consequences either, but you hate evil for what it is. Evil. Evil. Okay? A lot of people will not commit certain offenses or crimes or sins because they're afraid of the consequences. If it wasn't for the consequences, they'd go ahead and do it. That's not what Paul's talking about. He says, be affectionate to each other in brotherly love. Agape, right? Agape love. This is the love we experience as members of a family. We are not to be isolated from each other as Christian brothers and sisters. And we are to act as brothers and sisters lovingly would act toward each other. After all, we all have the same Father, right? So we're all part of the same family. He says we need to give each other priority and honor. You know what? Our country in modern America would be a better place if people would do that. Give each other priority and honor. In other words, rights, privileges, prestige, and entitlements are not important. They aren't important. Humility must always be the criteria. We are not to focus on our rights, but on our duties and obligations to the other person.
That's where the ego goes away.
Yes, and I'm telling you what, I'm not saying that I am against human rights, believe me. But we have gone so far to the one end in this country in rights without any focus at all on duties, responsibilities, and obligations that our society is sick. This is my opinion. This is not what Paul says. This is my opinion. Paul says, do not be sluggish in your zeal. What he's saying is, I think the Christian life has no room for lethargy. It requires intensity, not lethargy. When you engage in life's battle between good and evil, there isn't any excuse for being laid back. I mean, it's a battle. It's a war between good and evil going on in this world, and you can't just be lackadaisical about it. Some people may choose one side, some people may choose the other.
A lot of people are just lukewarm.
A lot of people are just lukewarm, and that's just not the way to deal with it. The people who have chosen evil are very, very aggressive about what they do. So if you choose good, you have to be aggressive about what you do. He says, keep your spirit at a boiling point. You can't follow Christ and be lukewarm. If you're a Christian and you really believe in what you say you believe, how can you possibly go through life unenthusiastically? This is one of the things about Christians that just blow me away. I've been in church and had people sing a hymn, okay? Let's say, let's just pick one. Christ the Lord is risen today, okay? People stare, Christ the Lord is risen today, hallelujah. And you think, what the heck's the matter with them? I mean, how can you be like that? They must not be.
In my case, I can't sing.
Well, that
Well,
doesn't care, you make a joyful
You
noise
can,
unto
yes,
the
make
Lord.
a joyful noise unto the
That's
Lord.
not a
But for
song.
heaven's sakes,
Joyful
call
but not
that
painful.
I can remember from my young years. See, when I graduated from high school and moved on to college, I turned my back on the church for a long time. I was totally against the church for, 10, 12 years.
I don't think that long, but.
Yeah, I was pretty close to that. I didn't want anything to do with the church. And there were a number of reasons for it. One of them was, I'd had it up to here with sour-faced Christians. It's one of the things that just bugged me, you know. There were some older folks in the church that just came in with these frowns on their face, you know. And they sat there, you can't sit there, that's my wife's seat, you know. You know, you think, what is the matter with these people? We had one fella in church, at the end of every service, whole congregation moved into the center aisle and held hands and sang a benediction. Eh?
Yeah, David was
And there
there.
was this older fellow,
That was when
he
we were back
refused
in
to hold
church.
hands. And somebody finally asked him, so what, are you have a germ thing? I mean, what is it that you won't hold hands? He said, well, some of these people I just don't like. For heaven's sake. And I saw so much what I thought was hypocrisy.
Yeah.
So much phoniness that I saw. We had one lady in the choir.
Oh, I can just,
She sat in the very front row of the choir. She was there every Sunday, and she'd sing
still
the hymns
see her.
away, and the minute church was out, she headed up to the tavern and got drunk. I thought, there's something wrong with that.
no, the tavern wasn't, it was right by the church at that time.
Yeah, it was.
Where Whitmore's, not
She
that,
was
it
an
was a
alcoholic,
different
and
one.
she managed to get sober enough to sing in the church choir and praise the Lord, and then she'd go right next door and get blasted. So anyway, I had a hard time.
But those are people, that's what you have to remember.
Well,
Those
as
are
I got
people.
older, I came to realize that the people who most need to be in church are the hypocrites. They're the ones that most need some healing.
The Pharisees.
Yes, yes. There is so much Phariseeism in the church today, it's scary. It's really scary. Paul says you need to serve the Lord. Now, there's another translation of the Greek from that phrase, and it's a better translation. It doesn't say serve the Lord, it says grab hold of the opportunities that come. That makes better sense to me, because too many of us, one of the tragedies of life is we fail to jump at the opportunities that are presented to us, and they become lost opportunities. It doesn't come back a second time. We don't get second chances at it. And we end up spending the next several years of our life mad at ourselves or regretting or feeling guilty or something because we didn't take advantage of the opportunity when we had the chance. So Paul says, grab those opportunities when you can. He says, rejoice in hope. Have to be optimistic. He says, if God's grace is sufficient for all things, and we really believe that God makes strength perfect in our weaknesses, then we should believe that we are up to handling any challenge that confronts us. There can be no such thing as hopeless situations as long as the power of God is behind us. And he says, meet tribulation with triumphant fortitude. Okay, Paul.
Boy, that's a bunch of hard work.
Any challenge in life can be met with a positive attitude if we meet that challenge with Christ. He says, persevere in prayer. When you stop praying, like most of us do during a really calm, happy stretch in our life, we don't pray anymore, and then all of a sudden there's a tragedy or a death or a catastrophe, and right away we start praying fervently again. Paul says if you do that, you lose the strength that God provides for you, and that if you don't pray, life begins to collapse. That's basically what he says. You have to pray all the time. He says, share with those in need. Key word for a Christian, give, 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 give. And he says, accept the responsibility of hospitality. He actually says, practice the open door. Whoa, now wait a minute, that sounds kind of familiar. Where have I heard that before? Christianity is the religion of the open hand, the open heart, the open door, and we would add the open mind. All right, thank you for all that, Paul. We will attempt to comply with that as best we can. Chapter 12, verses 14 through 21.
The open mind be something to do with wisdom? Could you consider that to be wisdom?
An open mind.
An open mind?
I would say, yeah, it has to do with wisdom. I would say it also has to do with compassion. It also has to do with understanding, non-judgmentalism, a lack of arrogance, probably think of a whole lot of other things as well. If we actually believe in open minds, open hearts, and open doors, Our church does a pretty good job of that, and we always have. But we have to keep reminding ourselves of that a lot. And, you know, it's preached from the pulpit a lot, we talk about it a lot, we keep it in front of us in posters, and, you know, we work at that. And as we grow and get bigger and more people come in, we have to keep saying, you know. And one example I can give you, we've had a couple of folks come into our church, and they have become active or a member, and it turns out that they were very, very conservative, fundamentalist in their belief. And some of the more liberal folks, some of the more liberal Methodists in our congregation, were having a hard time dealing with a couple of those people, okay? But Paul's got something to say about that. And he says, you know, people are different. They see things different. They accept things different. And we all have to be willing to tolerate and accept each other's differences. And it's a hard thing to do sometimes. And we've had a couple of failures in our church because of that, because we've had a couple of people with much more conservative outlooks and everything who've left. So, you know, it's something we really need to work on all the time. Okay, verses 12 through 14 is as, 14 through 21. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another, do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live in peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. When persecuted, react with prayer for those who are persecuting you. If you are hurt, insulted, mistreated, Paul encourages us to remember Christ when he was being murdered and suffering on the cross, that he prayed for those who were killing him. If he could do that, then, you know, maybe we can pray for those who insult and mistreat us. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. It is easy to weep with those who weep, much more so than it is to rejoice with those who rejoice. You know why? Because a lot of the time, the person who is rejoicing is celebrating a success that may very well have been a disappointment for us. You and a friend of yours are both after a promotion. Your friend gets the promotion, you don't. Can you rejoice with that person? It's a lot harder to do than it is to sit down and cry with somebody who's really in pain. It's easier to cry with somebody. But Paul says we need to do both, not only to sympathize with another person in their losses or sorrows, but to take joy in another person's success, even if it means we have to subjugate ourselves. It's not an easy thing to do. Live in harmony with one another. When discord and strife enters into a Christian family, the hope of doing any good work is over. Peace, kindness, and goodwill are absolutely essential. And as soon as disharmony, discord, and controversy enters a church family, that church immediately begins to become dysfunctional. And I think there are a number of us in here who have experienced similar kinds of experiences from that. Avoid pride and I'll use the word snobbishness. The Christian church in the time of Paul was the only place where a slave owner and a slave could sit down side by side as equals. The church still has to be the place where all social and ethnic and nationalistic, sexual barriers, distinctions of any kind have to be put aside. And we have to sit next to each other in absolute equality before God. It's something you have to work on. Something you have to really think about. Because in any church family, there's a lot of very different folks. Fella comes in off the street. He's obviously itinerant. He looks grumpy and grungy. In fact, he looks scary. He stinks. Hadn't had a bath in God knows when. And he comes in and sits down next to you in church.
And that's happened here too.
Yeah. Move. Well, even people who look nice and smell nice are given the cold shoulder in some churches. They come in, there's a guy standing at the door, here's your program. Thank you. You come in, sit down, a couple people in, move over a little bit. Nobody says, I mean, you know, boy. Make your conduct visible to all, Paul says. Christian conduct not only needs to be good and wholesome, it has to be seen. And we can all cite instances in which Christianity was presented in very harsh and unlovely ways. Real Christianity should be a really beautiful thing, a very lovely thing to see in action. It shouldn't be a harsh, punishing, hard thing. You know, I grew up in an environment in which, you know, I thought that, well, if you're going to be a really sincere Christian, you're not going to have much fun in life. I believe that. Because I saw people in the church who were supposed to be what were termed good Christians, and they weren't enjoying anything. They were having a miserable time. That's wrong.
Well, if God's love is unconditional, why shouldn't ours be?
Why not? Why not? And at least some of the people in our congregation, I know, seem to be having a great time. Live in peace with all people. Oh, come on, Paul. Give me a break. Live in peace with all. That isn't, huh?
It says to the best of your ability.
There you go. There you go. I was going to bring that point out because, come on, it isn't possible. But Paul said, well, there's two things he says about that. First of all, he says, if it is possible, you know, Christianity can't always be just an easygoing, total acceptance and tolerance of everything. I mean, at some point, because of ethics or morality, you got to take a stand and say, absolutely not. You know, that's it. We're not going there. So a battle has to be fought sometimes. But Paul says, if it is possible, you know, remain at peace with other people. And then he says, as far as you can. You read that in there? That's the other one. As far as you can. In other words,
Different version, but yeah.
what he's saying is that goodness, patience, tolerance is a lot more easy for some people than for others. I mean, let's face it. I'm not a very patient person. But I know people who just display incredible amounts of patience. I don't know how they do it. But what Paul is saying is it's a matter of individual ability. If a person can only control their temper for a limited period of time, at least it should be as long as they can. Okay? Now, guy number two may be able to control his temper for weeks further. But, you know, Paul's not stupid. He's saying, if it is possible, do it as long as you can, but be at peace with everybody else. He says, refrain from all revenge. First of all, he says, vengeance belongs to God. God alone can be the only one who can fairly judge. He says, second of all, treating a person with kindness rather than vengeance can move a person. I was watching a few nights ago, there's a channel on TV called American Heroes Channel. I don't know if you ever watched that. It's mostly military, World War I, World War II, old films and stuff like that. And in the war in the Pacific, when the American troops overtook an island, for example, most of the remaining Japanese committed suicide. And the reason was they had been told that Americans were monsters and that they would be tortured and mistreated in all kinds of horrible ways. A few of them did not commit suicide. And when they were captured by American troops, they were given food and water and a cigarette and treated decently. And it just blew them away. They couldn't believe, and you have to know that in the minds of a lot of those Japanese fellows, their whole attitude was very, very different after they went through that experience. To stoop to vengeance is to surrender to the forces of evil. Evil cannot be conquered with evil. Hatred only breeds hatred. The only antidote is love. The best way to destroy your enemy, make him a friend. It's tough stuff. Remember, Paul is giving this advice to the church in Rome. We will stop there today and continue starting next week. We start with chapter 13. And Paul's going to be talking about what is the role of a Christian in regards to owing allegiance to the state, to the nation. And we're going to have fun with this because Paul believes that the authorities, the powers to be in Rome or anywhere else, are actually approved and appointed by God.
Tough, very tough.
Yes, we got a real problem with this, folks, because if you think, I believe, that all the politicians in Washington D.C. are there because God, I got real problems with that. We're going to have some fun with that.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
You know, I think what's interesting to me, when I read a lot of this, and his letters to these different groups, somebody a while back said, if you imagine Paul speaking to a small group, these were only groups of 20, 30 people, maybe. I mean, these Christians were very small groups of people. I mean, it wasn't like a,
Massive assembly, yeah.
Central
Right.
Christian or the
Right,
Coliseum in Rome or
No.
something.
Right.
It was really a small group. And it really helps me to understand a lot of what he was saying, for that time in our history, and how people were treated and how people acted.
Well, people who were Christians, they were coming from the Greek, Roman background, from a heathen world and so on, and they were captured by the message of the good news, but they didn't know how to be it. And they didn't know what am I supposed to do now? I'm a Christian, okay. What do I do now, And Paul is constantly trying to explain to them the proper way to do it.
How's Sandy?